We've just finished up talking about fairness. Now I want to talk about rights. And it's a kind of subset of justice because justice, I suppose, would demand that people ought to receive their rights or get what they are entitled to. And rights goes with kind of entitlement. And along with fairness discussions nowadays, we do hear a lot of stuff about rights. And particularly in business ethics, we've got issues like customers' rights and employees' rights. And there's a large article in the readings about employees' rights, the right to work, the right to meaningful work, the right to a safe and healthy environment, the right to job security, the right to privacy, the right to injury compensation, the right to participation and voice in matters affecting workers, the right to equal treatment, to collective bargaining, goes all over the place, right? To freedom for harassment and to a living wage, people might even argue, right? Which is what's behind minimum wage things. Also, in the marketplace, you've got customers' rights. You got the right to truth in advertising and not being misrepresented. You got the demands for honesty in sales practices. And then you also have employer rights. So if you got a contract at will situation, the employer has a right to fire at will without giving reasons. So there's a whole host of rights issues. And I don't want to begin by talking about the specific issues. I just want to talk about some general issues with rights. Now, rights are an interesting thing, and it's been said that we live in an entitlement age. I'll leave that up to you. You can turn on your television, and people are protesting, and they have a right to this and a right to that, and civil rights, and there's even in philosophy things called natural rights. Back in the 18th century, there was a belief that right, everybody's got natural rights, and our Declaration of Independence starts with the preamble. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And what were those rights? Those were the rights to life, the right to liberty, and in our Declaration of Independence, the right to the pursuit of happiness. Now, where'd they come from? Well, by and large, the people who wrote the Federalist Paper, Jefferson and those people, they got them from an earlier English philosopher, John Locke. All right, and basically Locke put them out in his treatises on civil government, and he mentioned three natural rights: the right to life, liberty, and property. And then he talked about how you get property through working for it. So you've got a right to it if you earned it, to go back to our other thing, right? How do you distribute the goods? Well, if this is property out there, and if this is a good, and you work for it, then you've got a right to it. Okay. Now, property disappeared from the Declaration of Independence. We won't speculate on why or how, because we don't have quite enough time to get into that. But at any rate, so let's go back, though, and take a look at this right to life and this right to liberty. They are what are generally called negative rights. Right? Negative rights? Why negative rights? Well, because they're rights where nobody has to do anything. You've all probably heard the old adage, for every right, there's an equal responsibility. That is, somebody's got an obligation to provide the right. Well, that's the case with negative rights. If you got a right to life, I don't give it to you. I don't have the obligation to give it to you. All I got to do is respect it. If you got a right to liberty, all I've got to do is respect it. I don't have to give it to you. You already got it. I can take it away, and I can take away your life, and therefore I violate it. But all right, that's a different thing. So you got these negative rights. You don't have, other people don't have to do anything so that you get them. And that's fairly important. Now, Locke put property over there as a negative right. That's an interesting kind of thing, because then you got to talk about, well, how would you get your property? And he's got a kind of, well, you work for it kind of theory, and how that evolved into capitalism. And the property rights going with capitalism is a whole other issue that I'm not going to get into in this brief video, but we could talk about that during class. Excuse me. Right. So those are the negative rights. Now, on the other side, if you got negative rights, you probably got positive rights, or at least people claim there are positive rights. And the positive rights are the rights to receive something. All right, and I would think it's fairly obvious that you got a right to an education, or at least as a human being, since you wouldn't survive without it. Once you're born, you can make a claim that somebody ought to at least teach you enough to survive. All right, so that would be the fundamental basis of something like the right to property. But how about all this other stuff, the right to work and the right to meaningful work and that sort of stuff? Or the one that's most popular these days, the right to health care. Now notice, if you got these rights, somebody out there has got to have this commensurate, I like that word, commensurate responsibility to provide it. So if you got a right to health care, who's got the obligation to provide it? If everybody's got a right to employment, who's got the obligation to provide it? And in some countries where they claim there's a right to employment, if there are no individual employers, because if you say this employer's got an obligation to provide the work, then I could never fold my company, right? But if there aren't enough people providing work, right, who's going to provide it? Well, then it would kind of fall back to the government. All right, so you get these very, very interesting things once you start claiming rights, because you got to start looking at the obligations. However, once you do give somebody a job, you might legitimately claim that, all right, that person who takes the job from you in the name of humanity has a right to a safe and healthy environment. You shouldn't be able to do just whatever you want in that factory or that sort of stuff. So that's the basis of all these employee rights and that sort of stuff. But a right to a job or a right to good conditions, those are different kinds of claims. Now, there's one other strange thing. There's the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, and he didn't like rights talk at all. He just said, hey, rights, they're nonsense on stilts. Unlike the founding fathers of the United States, he didn't believe in any kind of natural rights. The only rights there were the rights that civil government gave you. So you didn't have a right unless somebody passed some legislation and gave you the rights. But at any rate, that's always a question you want to ask about a particular action or a particular situation. Are there any rights involved here? What are my civil rights, right? What are my natural rights? What are all these other rights? And in looking at a lot of business ethics issues, we really have got to come to grips with the rights question. Okay, so we've done, let me just summarize. We've done, is it good, right? Is it good for me? Is it good for shareholders? Is it fair? And now, does it respect rights? And you do have an obligation to respect others' rights. What I want to move on to now is the question of promises and commitments. Okay, let's leave rights behind and go over to promises.